What's going on, everybody? It is your boy Zamboni. I'm a musician and astrologer, and it is time to talk about the astrology of the week ahead. As always, I thank you so very much for being here with me. Thank you for going to ZamboniFunk.com and checking out where you can get reading, you can get merch, you can find the podcast. A fresh podcast just dropped with my boy Delicious Brian. That was a pretty good one because we ended up talking about Mercury retrograde, and currently Mercury is retrograde, and this week we're going to be looking at the Mercury cazimi. So Mercury is moving backwards and the sun is moving forward, and so they're going to meet in the same spot, and so Mercury is going to move into the heart of the sun, and so that is called a cazimi moment. So a lot of times the cazimi is going to be associated with what I often call it like a special message from the king. There's a kind of clarity, so Mercury retrograde is typically associated with delays or miscommunications or misunderstandings or wires getting crossed in some kind of way, right? You thought that this route was going to be faster, but it turns out that there's construction in the way or something like this, that kind of thing. So Mercury retrograde, it tends to be associated with that kind of thing. And then once we see the cazimi moment, we see that alignment with the sun. We see Mercury moving into the heart of the sun. We get a kind of clarity in that moment. And so this podcast that I just did with Brian is interesting because it's about sort of using, and this is Mercury in Sagittarius also, right? So Mercury is at home and comfortable in Gemini, which is opposite to Sagittarius. So this is Mercury very far from home and sort of like in a place that is difficult already before moving retrograde, and like things are sort of like getting upturned or being all in the air, right? And so there's an opportunity here. What I said last week was that there's an opportunity here to sort of upskill, to like get our communications better in some kind of way, because there is a clear difficulty or challenge which is associated with this moment in communications. And so as such, we could get super frustrated about that, and that's a total possibility. But there's also an opportunity to focus in on it and be like, all right, so how can we do a better job with this? What kinds of techniques are there in order to improve the communication situation in general? And how can I make sure that I'm being heard? How can I make sure that I am hearing the other people? And how can I get to the content, the emotional content, more importantly, of like whatever conversation is being had, in order to promote better communication in general. And so the podcast that we did this week is a really good one for getting to that. Brian is a great listener and a great speaker and orator, and it's cool that he and I get to have these kinds of conversations. So go check that out at ZamboniFunk.com. Let's talk about the astrology of the week ahead. This week we've got that cazimi that I just mentioned here, and that's interesting because that is also associated with the sun, right? So the sun is there in Sagittarius and is a part of this cazimi moment. And so the sun is in an interesting spot here, because the sun in Sagittarius, I like the sun in Sagittarius. It's like the sun in the last place before we get like full on wintertime, uncomfortable sun. You know what I mean? Like the sun isn't super good in Capricorn or Aquarius, which is opposite to the sun's domicile. So that's going to be like exceptionally uncomfortable. Capricorn is a very dark place. It's the place where we get in the northern hemisphere, which is where most of the humans live, and which is where astrology was developed. It's the least amount of light that is possible. That's where the winter solstice is, and so that marks the most dark versus light in a 24-hour period. And so the sun doesn't like being in that space very much. The sun doesn't like being in Aquarius very much. The Pisces is like fine, but like not a super great placement for the sun. Now, if you have those placements, I'm not trying to talk shit on your chart. There's always ways to work with it. There's always something good that can come out of that. And if you want to check that out, and you want to hear me talk about how excellent your sun in Capricorn is, then check out ZamboniFunk.com, get a reading. But as far as like raw sun stuff is concerned, the sun is not super comfortable in those places. And so I tend to like the sun in Sagittarius. This time we've got that Mercury retrograde going on. So there's like kind of some like weird stuff going on with the information or understanding and all of that sort of stuff, right? Also, the sun in Sagittarius is making a square to Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. And so Saturn is going to be, negation or denial or boundaries in some kind of way. Neptune is going to be confusing or delusional in some sort of way. And so what I feel like is going on here is that the sun is not necessarily wedded to factual accuracy. Right? Like the sun in Sagittarius by its nature is the sign of like, strong belief, faith, optimism, zealotry, perhaps. And that kind of thing is not necessarily, like, a lot of times you'll get things that are, factually inaccurate, but maybe metaphorically true in some kind of way. Like we get into parables and this kind of thing in this sort of, like good teaching tools, a great story that may not have actually been historically accurate, but like the story teaches you something. And so it's worth telling the story again anyway, right? Sagittarius is a place where that can happen in a big kind of way, especially once we get that Mercury retrograde, especially once we get the square to Neptune, especially. And so like, so that's an interesting position for the sun to be in, most especially because the sun is ruling Mars in Leo, and Mars in Leo is stationing retrograde this week. We've been coming up to this Mars station for a while now, and Mars has been slowing down, and also opposing Pluto in Aquarius. We saw the first, so there's going to be 3 of these oppositions. The first one of those was at the very last bit of Cancer and Capricorn. Now we're going to see 2 more, a retrograde opposition to Pluto, and that's going to be in Aquarius and Leo, and then we'll see a forward one in the springtime as well. And so Mars retrograde in Leo looks real uncomfortable, looks real, Mars retrograde is very much like, I don't give a fuck anymore, especially with that opposition to Pluto. Like, it is extremely aggressive. And the really interesting thing that we see going on here is that this happens at the same moment as the Mercury cazimi, where we've got this like moment of clarity, right? Where we've got this special message that wants to come through in this moment. And that special message looks, which involves the sun, is ruling in many ways this Mars retrograde in Leo, which is in the sun sign. So we've got that sort of like super strong message that wants to come through, and Mars looks really aggressive about it. At that same moment, then the moon is going to be moving through Aquarius. And so we're going to get an opposition to Mars, and we're going to see the moon carrying the light between Pluto and Mars. And so it's all Mars, Pluto, everything. And so Mars and Pluto, Mars is super aggressive and the warrior planet, and, wants to fight or inflame or these kinds of things, right? Especially Mars retrograde is like not ready to follow the rules, right? Mars direct might be a little more inclined to follow some rules. Mars retrograde doesn't give a shit about that. And then we add Pluto into that. Pluto is going to be like maybe distortion or power moves or this kind of thing, right? And so this looks like it's going to be really good for, information campaigns that destroy enemies, or that make it possible to destroy enemies, or something like this, right? It looks extremely aggressive. This looks like a great time to get into a fight with somebody, especially over a misunderstanding, or, I could see grudges taking place here, especially fixed signs like to hold a grudge sometimes. And so even if the misunderstanding, like there's some kind of way to clear it up, it might be emotionally, like you might be emotionally unable to get to that place. And so, or your opponent, or, some kind of party here might be emotionally unable to get to that place. And so it's a really strong moment for like aggression and fighting and this kind of thing. Then, at the end of the week, we see Venus, the planet of cooperation and relationships and togetherness and all this sort of stuff, moving into Aquarius and conjoining that Pluto. And so it's just more of this Mars-Pluto dynamic. So this looks like a very volatile, raucous kind of week. It looks like a great day or a great week for a shouting match or something like that. So we see a lot of retrograde motion. It's not a good time to initiate something. It's not a good time to try to begin something new and delightful, but rather a good time to notice that things are going crazy, and that the information situation isn't necessarily reliable, and it's going to require some extra focus and concentration. Slow down. Mercury retrograde is really good for slowing down. Don't forget to slow down this week. Thank you so much. Check you out next week.